Grab a beer and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Northwoods Beer Guy Podcast. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Northwoods Beer Guy Podcast. This is Mike, the Northwoods Beer Guy, and this week we have a little bit of a different episode. I am actually flying solo this week, and it's nothing to do with any of the team members, but my schedule is pretty busy here and not going to be able to really hook up with anybody to do a regular podcast. So what I thought was, what could I do to get some information out to you guys and let you know what we've been up to. And I thought, what better time than right after Memorial Day to kind of go over how the Memorial Day beer tasting went up in the Northwoods here this past weekend. So, as you know, we had talked about how we were going to handle it. You know, we were doing a blind taste test and things like that. So let me go a step back. If you are new to the podcast and you don't know kind of the backstory of this, we have a camper in northern Wisconsin, and we have a bar on the deck. And for a long time, for many years, a number of the guys that are up at the camper, we would get together and we would have beer tastings. And it started off pretty small, and then, you know, the number of people that got invited and such, there's probably 7 of us roughly at times. And everybody would start bringing a few craft beers. And then eventually it became everyone would show up with like at least a 12-pack. And it took pretty much all day. And then we would all kind of get in trouble simply because a lot of the guys got a little tipsy and they had a little ways to walk to get back to their campers. So after that situation, it got to the point where I was talking to my wife and I said, you know, I think we need to get this kind of under control a little bit. And she agreed. And I said, what do you think of the idea of having 3 categories? We'll have, 2 categories that the winner of each beer tasting, they can pick the 2 categories. The third category will be called wildcard, and that can be anything. Again, a step backwards, we do have 3 per season. We have a Memorial Day, a 4th of July, and a Labor Day. So that's where, for instance, for the Memorial Day, the winner of the Labor Day tasting, they get to pick the 2 categories for Memorial Day. And then Memorial Day picks for 4th of July. 4th of July winner picks for Labor Day. Now, how we come up with winners is, like I said, we'll pick a category. So let's say an ale. And everybody has to bring a beer that's an ale. If it's a porter category, everybody has to bring a porter. Or, for instance, this time the categories were something from the garden was the first category. So you had to bring a beer that had something that you could find in a garden, like let's say a fruit, a vegetable, an herb, a spice, something like that. It had to be in there. The second category was something that you would find at a bake sale. So it could be cookies, pastries, things like that. And then the third category is wild card. So this year at the Memorial Day tasting, we actually had 7 people that attended. And the podcast team was actually very well represented. Of course, I was there. Jim was there. If you remember Kirk from a couple seasons ago, he was on a podcast with us up in the Northwoods. And then we had Matt and Jay, that they've been on a few podcasts with us recently as well. The other 2 gentlemen that were there were Tom, who has a camper by us up there, and Andy, who also has been in a number of the competitions, and his parents have a camper in the same location that we do. Now, Tom has won the tasting in the past. Andy has won it. I've won it. Kirk has won it. So it's usually pretty good representation, and it's pretty tough competition. BK, he's been in it, and he's won it a number of times as well. Unfortunately, as you know, he bought the resort, so his time is kind of limited on what he can do for something like that. So he had to unofficially bow out, unofficial, quote, unquote. He was just too busy on the holidays, especially now because of being a resort owner, so he was not in it this year. So anyway, so what I'd like to do is kind of just let you know the beers that we tried, kind of give you a heads up on, hey, here's who, had each beer and things like that. So hopefully if you're out there and you find some of these, you can give them a try. So the first one we had was something out of the garden. And the first beer that we had, the beer that actually came in 7th, was by Whole Hog, and it was their Tart Blueberry Ale. And that one, it was kind of crazy because when we tasted it, it almost had a raspberry flavor to it. So that kind of threw us off, especially when we saw that it was tart blueberry. It really was a surprise. And yeah, that was kind of something we weren't expecting. And Matt had brought that one. Then we had another Whole Hog. It was hazelnut brownie. And that one You did get kind of a hazelnut flavor to it, and it did have somewhat of a chocolate flavor, but it was kind of one of those that it was a little hard to distinguish, really, the flavor. There wasn't a huge amount there. And I don't know if it could have been an older bottle. That I don't know. I don't think it was. But just the flavor was a little bit different on actually both of those. And I think Jay brought that one. We also had from Untitled Arts, and we've had a number of beers from them in the past. Tom had brought their Fruit Cup cocktail. And it was, boy, it tasted like the juice you would get out of a fruit cup from, wherever you want to buy it, whatever store. When they have those fruit cups, they have like that syrup in there. It kind of had that kind of a flavor to it. It was actually fairly decent, but, the competition was pretty taut, so. But that one was good. One that really surprised me, Kirk brought Brickfield Triple Threat Lager. And we've talked about it, not this beer specifically, but we've talked about pepper beers in the past and how I've had, beers with a lot of different kinds of pepper in them. Well, this one, it was a triple, it had 3 different peppers in it. It had jalapeno, it had habanero, and Carolina Reaper. And that was really kind of surprising because I've never had a beer with Carolina Reaper in it before. I've had with ghost peppers. This one, actually, I liked it because of the pepper flavor. It did have a burn to it, but it was a lot more mild of a burn than what I was expecting, especially when we discovered that it had, Carolina Reapers in it. That one, it was kind of a toss-up to some of the guys because, some of them really don't care for pepper. Other ones, the burn. And there's other ones of us that really kind of do like it. So it was an interesting tasting on that one. I thought it was really good. That one actually finished in 4th place. So then we had Three Sheeps Pumpkin Veneration, barrel-aged pumpkin veneration. I brought that one. And again, we've said that one was, in the past, is probably the best pumpkin beer that we've ever had, is what Jim and I have said in the past. This one tasted a little bit different. I don't know if it's because, I honestly don't know, because we got it from the Barrel Society. We picked those up in January, I believe it was. And so I don't know. We'll have to wait and see how it tastes later on in the year, but it had just a little different flavor than what we were used to. So it kind of threw me for a loop on, when we were trying to figure out what it was. Then we had Bourbon County Brickyard Stout. Jim had brought that one. And again, it's a solid Bourbon County. It still does have that sweetness to it. Some people are a little torn on that from Goose Island because, a lot of people are saying, man, they're really kind of, they're sweet because they're higher, ABV, so they sweeten them up. It was still a solid beer, and that finished actually in the runner-up position for this category. In the first place, Andy had brought KBS Hazelnut Fudge, and it actually could have worked for either category. From the garden, it had hazelnuts in it. Very solid beer, very good fudge flavor to it, and you got the hazelnut. It was really, really good. Now, in the past, I should have said this first. In the past, when we would do it, we didn't know which beer it was. My wife is the bartender. She'll pour, our portion in all of our taster cups. We don't know what it is. And then we would do a score and then say if it's first, second, third, fourth, etc. This time, what we did was we didn't reveal the beer until after the very last one in this category. So that way we're trying to keep it to where people didn't know which beer we had and which one was coming up. Because at times, that could kind of sway your voting if you knew your beer still wasn't out there. So that's what we're trying to cut back on. So after the first category, like I said, Andy won it. He was in first place. And since there were 7 people at the tasting, when you get first place, you got 7 points. Second place got 6, third got 5, and et cetera, down to 7th place, it got 1 point. So Andy was sitting first with 7. Jim had 6. I had 5. Kirk had 4. Tom was at 3, Jay 2, and Matt 1. So it was definitely surprising, some of those beers, because like I said, the pumpkin veneration really kind of threw us for a loop, especially Jim and I, because we've had it, twice, and it's just been outstanding. And this one, it was still good. I definitely got the pumpkin spice flavor, but it did have a little bit different flavor to it. So we'll see. We do have another can or 2 of it that we had picked up, so we'll see how it ages. Hopefully it was just maybe that can. And what else was trying to think and again, like I said, that triple threat lager with the peppers, that really was a surprise to me. And boy, if I can find it, I may pick up some more of that because it really was good. Not over the top hot, but it did have a heat to it. So that was really, really good. So in between our tastings, once we get done with like the first round here, we always take a break. We have a table with a number of snacks. People, all the guys that are involved, they bring snacks. My wife makes snacks. So we have food in between. We'll take a little break and things like that just to, so you're not rushing through and overindulging, so to speak, I guess you would say. So now the second round was something from a bake sale. And I will say there was a couple of beers in here that we did have basically some valid concerns as far as how it was from a bake sale. And I guess basically we kind of let it slide, this one, but it was one of those that really, technically it was going to be hard to legitimately say it was from a bake sale. So, but again, like I said, it's all in fun anyway. It's for bragging rights. We have a homemade trophy that you have to add something to it if you win. And we have a plaque that we put if you win, you get your name on it. So, I mean, it's nothing crazy, but anyway, so we just kind of let it slide. Now, the beers that we had for that one, we had one that was a Mad Duck chocolate stout. And that one was pretty decent. You did get, somewhat of a chocolate flavor to it. I've had it once before, and it seemed like it was a little bit more mellow this time than what I was used to from when I had it before. So that kind of made it harder to try to figure out what it was. And that's one thing that I will say, when you go in a totally blind taste testing, and it makes it a little more difficult, I think, to pick out all the flavors that you're supposed to find. That was kind of surprising to me because, like, when Jim and I are doing the podcast or any of the guys, we're reading what's in it. You know what you're looking for, and it definitely makes it easier, I think, to taste all of those. When you're going in completely blind, not knowing what it should taste like, what you should be looking for, it was really an interesting challenge, to be honest with you. And it'll be something that'll be interesting as we move forward with this. So we had that one. We had another individual brought the KBS hazelnut fudge and put it in this category, which I totally understand. With a bake sale, I can see how fudge would be in there. Now, it was just wild because in the first category, the hazelnut fudge actually won the category, and in the bake sale, it finished sixth. And it was surprising how different those two beers tasted. They were the exact same brand, exact same everything, both KBS hazelnut fudge, but the first one had a very, very prominent, fudge flavor, and hazelnut was outstanding and all that. And this one, just seemed like it was way more muted. So it was really kind of interesting to see that those two were so drastically different. We were all shocked. I mean, we couldn't believe it. And in fact, when my wife brought the bottles out and the cans out for this one, she said, "You guys are going to really be surprised at where these kind of fell into place." And she wasn't lying. It was really crazy. So we also had, now this was one that we kind of weren't sure how it should have fit into a bake sale. It was Founder's Breakfast Stout. And the gentleman that brought this, he thought that it was breakfast instead of bake sale, apparently. We looked and I said, well, there is vanilla in it, and we let it go. But yeah, it was definitely kind of stretching the boundaries on that one. And we have had in the past where we've had to disqualify beers from a category because it wasn't what we called for. But this time, since we were testing out this new system and all of that, we just decided to let it go and see what happened. We also had, from Three Sheeps, we had the Wolf. It was the Wolf it had some kind of pepper in it. I can't pronounce it because it started with a G, but I can't pronounce the name of it because I don't think I've ever actually heard the legitimate way to say it. So that one, I mean, it's a very good beer. And again, it had peppers, so I liked that, but again, that was kind of one of those, how is that a bake sale? And that was another one, the same kind of thing that we were like, I don't know how it works, but we let it go. We had KBS iced latte, and one of the gentlemen asked, well, how is that in there? And I said, well, I'm pretty sure you can find iced lattes at a bake sale a lot of times. So we did let that slide as well. And it was pretty good. It had a pretty nice kind of a aroma and somewhat of a coffee flavor, like a iced latte would have. So it was pretty smooth, and it was a little bit surprising. It fit in pretty well. So again, another one that was kind of on the fence, but since we let the other two go, that one was going to fall there too. Then we had another one of the Wolf varieties, and this one was coconut. So that one, okay, you can buy coconut, things with coconut at a bake sale. So, okay, we let that slide as well. Again, trying out this new system. It was interesting. Like I said, definitely had a coconut kind of a flavor to it. Really smooth. You could tell it was high ABV, but it didn't taste. That's the one thing with all of these, honestly. There was some that really had a strong aroma of booze to it, but then when you tasted it, they were really smooth. So it really kind of surprised everybody just how smooth a lot of these were, that you didn't get a burn, you didn't get a strong alcohol flavor in some of them. It was really kind of surprising. So that was kind of a nice thing to discover as well. And then the beer that finished in number one was by Southern Tier. It was the Caramel Cookie Bar. And that one, unbelievably, you tasted caramel. You had like that kind of a cookie flavor to it. Again, just an amazing, honestly, fit this category perfectly. And luckily enough, I was the one that brought that one. So I got kind of fortunate there, but it definitely had the most similar flavor to something at a bake sale. And I was surprised. I was expecting to get, Jim and I have had a couple cookie beers before, but they were around Christmas time. They possibly didn't have, we wasn't able to find any of those or ran out of them. So I can totally get it. But I was expecting to have more along those lines, maybe more of a pastry stouts, possibly, things like that. But like I said, some of the people, I think they were a little confused on what we were calling for, or it was just the beers that they had. So I'm not sure. But anyway, so in that round, I got first, and then it was Jim, Andy, Matt, Jay, Kirk, and Tom. That's the order that we finished in the second category. So after the first two categories, Andy and myself were actually tied with 12 points. So it was going to be, another pretty tough battle, so to speak, going into the final round to just see who's going to come out on top. And once again, we took a break, had some more snacks, chit-chatted, joked around, all that good stuff. And then we got ready for the wild card. Now, the wild card round, typically they're a lot higher ABVs, mostly stouts. And if I remember right, I believe there was 6 of the 7 beers that were in this class were stouts. And Matt, as you guys know that have listened, he's not a huge barrel-aged fan. Well, a lot of different categories he's not a huge fan of. He normally drinks Busch Light, stuff like that. So some of them I think he was having a little hard time with, but it was his first time there. Jim kind of convinced him to partake, and I give him credit. He was definitely out of his comfort zone, but I think he did all right. So let's see. So the wild card, here's the beers that we had. We had an Urban Growler Bock. And that was actually, it was a good Bock beer, and the way they get placed in order when they come out, it's just kind of, Susie just grabs one out of the cooler. And so there's no rhyme or reason to it. And like I said, if this was a Bock category, it was a good Bock. But knowing it's wild card, it was going to be a tough row to hoe, so to speak, for this one, because we knew there was going to be all sorts of high-octane beers and big flavors. And unfortunately, Tom brought that, and he did finish in 7th place. So we also had, this one kind of surprised me. We had Central Waters Peruvian Morning. Jim brought that. It ended up in 6th place, and it surprised me because we've had Peruvian Morning before, and it usually has a pretty strong coffee flavor, really a good beer. And this one, there wasn't a whole lot of flavor to it. It really kind of shocked us, to be honest with you. You could kind of taste the coffee, but it really wasn't as big of a flavor as what I remember. And that, like I said, I think it surprised a lot of people. We were just like, okay, and like I said, again, it really is something to see how you're picking out flavors when you don't know what flavors are supposed to be there. And this one, like I said, it hopefully it might have been just that can, but like I said, the coffee flavor wasn't real big, so it was kind of surprising. We then had Lexington Brewing, which we've had a number of their beers. They have a distillery and a brewery, so I think pretty much all their beers are in barrels that they used to distill things in. And this one was their bourbon barrel aged mango wheat. That one was actually kind of surprising. You definitely got a mango. And I was shocked a little bit. I didn't really pick up a lot of bourbon flavor in it. And honestly, the wheat flavor, I didn't pick much of that up. And I'm sure part of it's because it was barrel aged and probably from the mango as well, because the mango was actually fairly strong. And it kind of surprised me. So it was really good, though, honestly. If you like mango, I definitely think you'd like it. The ABV, I don't remember right off the top of my head. I apologize. It was probably, if it wasn't double figures, 10% or more, it was probably right up there, though, because most of their beers are fairly high in ABV. But again, the mango wheat was really good. I was impressed. We had Founders Porter, and that one, is one of those classic. It's been around for a long time. Very decent beer. It kind of surprised us, when we were tasting it. It had little hints of coffee, maybe some chocolate. We were able to kind of pick out a few different things that we felt like we were tasting, and it was pretty decent. It did finish in fourth place. It was definitely a solid beer, and for kind of your go-to standard porter, it's pretty decent. Founders does do a good job on pretty much all their beers, and yeah, we were pretty happy with how that one went. The next beer, and I do apologize, I did not write down the name of the company that made it. It was called Yo Ho Ho Rum Barrel Aged Stout. And it was actually one that I had brought. We picked it up when my wife and I and BK and his wife, we went to his house for his birthday, and we went around to, I can't remember if there's probably 4 or 5 breweries around the Twin Cities area. And they had like 2 bottles of this. So BK bought one, I bought one, and I've had mine for a little while now. And so I decided, hey, I'm going to bring that up. Really, you could tell when you tasted it that it was a different barrel. It wasn't a bourbon barrel, but I just couldn't put my finger on what it was. And that was the kind of a bummer for me because, I am definitely a rum fan, but the rum flavor wasn't really that prominent. I do apologize, ladies and gentlemen. The road that's going back behind here is got some traffic going, so you are probably picking some of that up, and I do apologize. But like I was saying, the rum barrel, that rum flavor, I just wasn't picking it up. It was a solid beer. It had really good flavor to it, but it wasn't really a rum flavor. And I think that did hurt it a little bit. But, again, when you don't know for sure what beer you're tasting, what you're supposed to be looking for, we really didn't know for sure which one it was. Again, I did like it, but again, I wish it had more rum flavor to it. So, unfortunately, for me, it finished in third. Second place, Kirk actually brought Surly Barrel Aged Darkness from 2025. That one was really good. You could tell it was, high ABV, but it didn't have a burn to it, and just a solid beer. And we've had a number of episodes we've done on Surly Darkness. If you remember right, earlier this year, Jim and I did one, and we actually had the Barrel Aged Darkness, I believe from 2022, 2021 or 2022, and we nominated it for a Beer of the Year category because it was just so good, and it aged, for that long. And this one was a solid beer as well. They're always doing good stuff. So it was really nice to see that somebody had brought one of those to let us partake in. And in first place for the wild card was the Prairie Artisan Ales Bomb. We've had that before. I think we've had it in the podcast as well, possibly. I'd have to look back. Prairie Artisan Ales, they do a lot of, it's kind of crazy because they do a lot of high ABV, stouts. They have sours. They've got all sorts of different styles, and they seem to do really well in all of them. And I know Jim has brought it up in the podcast before that Prairie Artisan Ales, the bomb, they also had at one point a 4-pack where it was the bomb deconstructed. So you had one bottle of the bomb, and then there was 3 different ingredients that are used in there. And I do apologize, I don't remember what all of them are right off the top of my head, but they had the base model or the base beer with one of each of those in it separately, and then they had them all together in the bomb. It was really a neat thing to see how they all worked together, to try them separate and then have it all together. Yeah, so they did well, and Andy brought that one. So, in that category, Andy took first, Kirk took second, I took third, Jay took fourth, Matt fifth, Jim sixth, and Tom was seventh. So when it came down to it, we add all those scores up, and then we announce the winners. We start from seventh place and go up. So in seventh place, Tom had 5 points. Matt, for his first time there, did fairly well. He was in sixth with 8. Jay was in fifth with 9 points. Then we had Kirk was in fourth with 12, and Jim was third with 14. I ended up second with 17, and Andy was first with 19. And that was his third time that he's won the competition. So good for you, man. He now gets to pick the 2 categories for 4th of July, and he has to add something once again to the trophy. And it's kind of funny because the first time he won, I believe it was the first time he won, he added a breathalyzer. So it was hilarious. We've added stuff on there that it's just kind of crazy. Everybody gets a good joke out of it. And like I said, it's for epic bragging rights kind of thing. And you have the trophy until the next tasting. So overall, it went really well. I think one thing, we were trying to figure out what things need to be tweaked and such. I do think I need to do a little more tweaking behind the bar. So when people are sitting around the bar, they can't see what Susie's pouring, because again, not that anybody did, but I just think it'll make it a little more, so there's no question. And then the other thing is just make sure everybody knows for sure what the categories are, which, I posted in a little chat group that we have and such. So I just think a couple of the guys misread it for the bake sale. But overall, I think we're going to continue to do it that way. It's one of those things where it's just kind of tough to figure out what's the best way to do a tasting like this and to have it be fair. And like I said, this was the first time that we did it this way, where we didn't, know what the previous beers were. Before, like I said, you tasted it, we give it out of 5 stars, just like we do on the podcast. And then if there's 3 out there, you say, is it first, second, third, or fourth, and you look and see, okay, here's the 4 beers that we had. And then you place it. But, that can lead to people placing their beers because they know it's theirs, things like that. So we're just trying to make it more fair. And this time what we did is we just went off of stars, came up with here was the average, and then we placed it after that based purely on average. I think, we keep getting more used to the system, tweaking a few things here and there. I think it'll be more fun, and it'll be interesting to see because it was, like Susie said, that we were shocked on how some of them placed. I do think that that's kind of more along the lines of what we're looking for instead of, trying to place them compared to these other beers that you already know what they are. Again, it's all in fun, but we're just trying to make it a little more interesting and keep people, keep them a little more intrigued until the end. So we've got a little time here. Andy will let me know what his 2 categories are, and then, of course, wildcard. And we will make those announcements in plenty of time. So then our group will be able to do their shopping to bring the best beers they can find, and we'll see who wins then. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, if you ever have any questions on that stuff, make sure you let us know. We'd be glad to answer any questions, give you more information on how we started, doing these things, how we're, things we've tweaked and what we've learned on some of these things. So it's, like I said, it's always in fun. It's always just a great time with good friends to, try all these different beers. Some of them we never would have tried before, and it's just really a neat thing. So if you got questions on that, if you got questions on the show, anything like that, by all means, make sure you let me know. And next week we will be back with more of a more traditional episode. But, I'd like to thank you for sitting here with me for this little bit of time and kind of going over, here's all the beers we tried. If there's beers that you would love to hear or, have us bring to a tasting, or categories, if you have ideas on categories, let me know. Email us, message us through all our social medias and let us know if there's a category you think would be fun to have at a beer tasting. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening. And like we always say, we hope your campfire is always warm and your beer is always cold. See ya. Thank you for listening to the Northwoods Beer Guy podcast. If you have a question, a comment, or a beer you'd like us to review, please feel free to send us a message at northwoodsbeerguy@gmail.com. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. If you're on Untappd, look up Northwoods Beer Guy and send a friend request. Until next week, I hope all your campfires are warm and all your beer is cold.